The Diesel Podcast,
Digital integration in English as a second or other language.
Episode 60, Using TV Shows in the Esol Classroom.
Welcome to DIESOL. This is episode 60. We are your hosts. I am Brent Warner.
And I'm Michelle Reyes.
Hoi hoi.
Ahoy hoy. Konnichiwa.
Konnichiwa, konbanwa.
Konbanwa, Ohio. Where are you in the world? It's evening for you.
Yeah, sure. Well, depending. It's morning when this gets released, though, so that's nice.
Yeah.
How's it going?
It's good. I'm almost done with my trip here in Japan. I'll be home in a couple months.
Oh,
I'm sad to be home in a couple months.
Yeah, but you've got other things going on. So,
Oh, yeah.
You're going to be on the Biebs, the BBC.
The Biebs, as in not the Justin Biebs.
Not the Justin Biebs.
You used the wrong nickname.
The British Biebs.
The British Biebs.
That's exciting.
BBC Learning English. BBC Learning English. So I know that we've talked about them in many of our episodes, and I use them all the time. So I think it will be available. The episode will be available after February 24th. You can find it on their Facebook page.
Cool. We will share out some links to that. That'll be awesome. I think that's super cool. So congratulations.
I think it's cool too because I use BBC Learning English all the time.
Yeah, it's great. So you're going to be totally Biebs famous, which will be
Biebs.
amazing. I don't know if that's a thing, but we'll call it Biebs famous.
Biebs famous.
And today we don't have a guest. It's just us, and so
we're the guests.
Well, yeah, I mean, everybody who's listening with us is our honorable guest of honor. And actually, you know what's actually good? This topic is a great one for people to contribute their ideas to, for sure, because we can only cover a little tiny bit of our topic today. But I would love to hear other people's ideas and suggestions as we talk about using TV shows in the ESOL classroom. I think there's a lot to jump into, Ishel, so let's not dilly-dally. Let's hop right on over right after this brief commercial break. All right, we don't have commercials, but anyway.
So surely you're talking about Friends.
Oh my God. Okay, so let's start the conversation here. So
Full House.
Yeah. Do your students still ask about Full House at this point or not?
No.
Poor Bob Saget, rest in peace. But okay, so I think we have to start the conversation with a little bit of like getting real with people, which is if you're using Friends and if you're using Full House or well, Full House, I think we're out of Full House zone, but I do know a lot of teachers, not a lot, but I know that teachers still use Friends as like kind of a TV show, a go-to TV show for their classes and for activities and things like that. And I'm just going to challenge that Friends ended almost 20 years ago, right? It started almost 30 years ago. So
just so you know, things start phasing out when Forever 21 has a whole vintage section dedicated to Friends apparel. Because now the millennials wear it because it was cool back then, and they haven't seen Friends. They just know that it's a thing.
Yeah, it's like
it was a thing.
Yeah, a kind of a kitsch thing. So I guess I would say like thinking about your students, right? So if you have students who are 18 years old, they were not born when that show ended, right? And so that, again, I'm not. Well, I can talk a little trash. I don't love Friends. I think there are some parts are great. I have some friends who love Friends, and then I also think then we've also talked about like, or we've seen on Twitter, and we've seen people kind of complain about like Friends is not very representative of different cultural and ethnic beliefs and all sorts of things like that, and so it's got its own set of problems, and even some of the jokes you go back to now and you're like, ooh, you can't totally say that, right? And so
you don't want to use that English.
Yeah. So, and again, this is not really just about Friends. This is just about kind of the bigger conversation of television shows. Like as teachers, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's really important for us to use television shows to connect culture for our students, help them understand language, help them understand what's going on in the world, all of those types of things. But I'd also say that like there are times to modernize and update what you're showing to your students. And so
Right.
in the past, we used to, um, go buy an entire DVD set of a series just to be able to show one show. Or if you're going back further, maybe you had recorded VHS episodes or something like that. But I guess we want to talk about today is kind of saying like, hey, it's time to recognize where your students are today. And yes, you can go back and we do have access to those old shows. But we kind of just wanted to say like, hey, let's look at a little bit more modern conversation. Let's look at like how we can engage students with shows that are more of today's era. And that doesn't mean that has to be on air today, and this conversation will fade in the next 5 years, and we might have to
Mm-hmm.
refresh it after that too, but I think it
That's
is
what we should
important.
be doing.
Yeah, we should be going through and looking at different shows and kind of seeing how they connect to our students. So Ishel, first part, we decided this kind of came up from you because you were talking about some of the
Mm-hmm.
stuff you're doing in your class, but
Mm-hmm.
I thought the first part maybe we'd talk about some of the shows that might be worth considering or looking at for your students. And then in the second part, we can talk about some different ideas on how to use shows in your classroom. So
Yeah.
so we'll do our best to kind of keep those two parts separated from each other, where we really kind of say like, this is what
Mm-hmm.
the show is and this is what it can be. And then like maybe some uses for them a little bit later, but we might overlap on one side or the other a little bit as well. So Ishel, I'm going to start you off because your idea was
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Kickstarter.
My idea was birthed out of using Saturday Night Live skits in the classroom.
Mm.
And we'll talk about those in the latter half. But did you want me to list the ones I?
No, I think well, Saturday Night Live, like, and again, we'll jump into that a little bit later,
Mhm.
but it's classic, and I think the nice thing about Saturday Night Live is that if you use more modern skits in Saturday Night Live, then students themselves can go back, right? And they can go, oh,
Mhm.
there's more. Like, I know this famous comedian. I didn't know they came from Saturday Night
Oh
Live,
yeah,
right?
right.
And so they can make a lot of cultural connections kind of through their way of like, oh, okay, I'm watching a
Yeah,
modern show, but what if I go back 5 years? What if I go back 10
yeah.
years, right? I'm like, oh,
Well,
Will
did you know
Ferrell or
that?
whoever.
Did you know that SNL had BTS on the show?
No, I didn't know that.
Well, they did, and neither did I. I just for kicks, I typed in SNL BTS to see which celebrities how far they had reached,
Mhm.
and sure enough, they were there. And we know our current population or our generation right now loves BTS. So what a great way to get them interested.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would be surprised if they weren't. BTS is like the biggest band in the world, right?
They are, I think, right now,
Yeah.
and they've been for a while.
Okay, so my first show that I'm choosing here is Superstore. Superstore, for those who haven't watched it, it ended recently, maybe within the last year or so, but it was a great sitcom about kind of working in a Walmart / Target type of store. Family friendly for the most part, some little adultish parts, in some areas and some real conversations and things, but workplace, lots of variety in terms of like ways of seeing the world and people talking about their different challenges or issues and things like that. So I really think that like if I were looking for a modern show that was kind of followed some fairly standard sitcom patterns, Superstore would be a great choice for a lot of people.
Yes. I think stand-up comedy is great for students. Stuff like Aziz Ansari, Gabriel Iglesias, known as Fluffy. Now, this kind of comedy presents a lot of language challenges for students, but for your more advanced students, particularly those who a lot of my TOEFL students study from stand-up comedy because there's so much to understand and unpack just in a short, like 5 minute, what are they called? Sets,
Mm-hmm.
like joke sets.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, again, you would have to some of it is cultural, some of it is deals with current social issues, but these are great ways to see language, and also understand that humor has a different place in every country. It's just, I don't know what to say about it.
Yeah, well,
why we think that things that are funny to us, but not to others.
Yeah, and I think one of the great things about stand-up too nowadays is like there's always new specials coming out, right? Like in the past, it used to be like, oh, there's a new special coming out like this year by one comedian, and now it's like every month there's like 4 or 5 specials coming out, so you can definitely find something that's like pretty topical and relevant. It's like they record something on the weekend, and then like 2 or 3 weeks later it's out, and so yeah, it's pretty great. My next one is Bob's Burgers. Do you watch this, Esol?
Yeah, I've watched a few episodes. I like Bob's Burgers.
I love Bob's Burgers, and as you go in further and as you get more into
and this
the
is animated.
It's animated, yeah.
Right,
so
yeah.
so totally family friendly, right? Like it's a family story about these like elementary kids to maybe junior high-ish, I guess. So Tina, maybe it might be 6th or 7th grade or something like that. And then the 2 parents, and like everybody just has like these great personalities. They speak fairly clearly for the most part. And so there's a lot of great pulls, and it's not super hard to understand what's going on. And then there's also these musical numbers that can kind of capture attention as well. So I like Bob's Burgers as a choice.
Yeah, the next one is Parks and Recreation, and I have not seen a lot of episodes.
Oh, really? I've seen the whole thing.
Yeah. So, but I know that a lot of my students talk about this show, and I'm always shocked that they are brave enough to venture out into the world of comedy and sarcasm, because sarcasm is not the type of humor that other countries may have or appreciate. But Parks and Recreation is one. Do you have anything to say about this show?
I love it. I mean, it's a great show. I watched it all the way through. They kept on building these really interesting characters on Parks and Rec. I think a lot of teachers right now kind of lean towards The Office, but The Office is also kind of getting older, whereas Parks and Rec, they definitely overlapped, of course, but like Parks and Rec has a little bit more modernity. Office is starting, like when you watch like older episodes of The Office, you're like, ooh, this is old. A little old.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's great. And then the nice thing about Parks and Rec is that everybody has a character that they kind of can associate with. And so I think when you can build that type of thing and have some real strong character development, you go, I love that character, then you're going to want to keep coming back and seeing what they do. So that's a good thing for language learners, to be able to say like, I love Ron Swanson, right? And like I want to see like how he expresses himself and how he's connected to the world. So really excellent. And speaking of good character development, my next choice has been a favorite for many people over the last 2 years, which is Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso is just outstanding. Like the positive show that we all need. You'll hear people say it all over the place. And if you haven't, I don't know if you've seen it yet, Esol, have you?
No, I've never even heard of it.
Oh my God, it's so good. It's just...
What is this on? Is this like on a streaming?
Yeah, it's on Apple TV, so that's kind of where the problem is for a lot of people. But it is truly a positive and joyous show, and like it's about this this very friendly and positive American football coach who gets hired to go to England and coach soccer, and it's kind of about the you get into like the cultural issues about how strongly the Brits feel about soccer and all of these things, and then but also like how he has a totally different approach than what the traditional like scream at your players type of thing is, and so it's just very well done, and there's a lot to dissect. And also I think a really interesting thing for some of our students would be understanding that like, hey, in England and in America we both speak the same language, but our cultures are very different in a lot of ways, right? And so I think that could be a lot of fun for students to explore.
That reminds me of something that recently happened in a classroom where one of my students, and this is a teacher, they're teachers who are coming for training
Mm-hmm.
and getting a lot of English, more English instruction from me. But one of the teachers knew what a Hail Mary pass was.
Oh.
And I was like, what the heck? It took me forever to figure out what that was. You have to watch football. You have to be around, American football. He learned it from a TV show, and he explained it to the rest of the class. So I said, explain what a Hail Mary is. And then we talked about religion and why it's called a Hail Mary and all sorts of stuff. So it was pretty cool. But again, it's from TV. Who would have thought?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you just pick up the right information. So
Mhm.
that's awesome.
Yeah, so the next show that I have is one it's a recent show. It's on Netflix. It's Cobra Kai.
Yes.
And I think yeah, Cobra Kai. My students are crazy over this show. They talk about it when they've binged, so they talk about it often.
Yeah.
It's the new iteration of the Karate Kid.
Yeah, so the Karate Kid,
like it's based on.
it's the same characters. It's like
Yeah.
it's Johnny and Daniel,
Mhm.
and like they're adults now, and like kind of what happened to them over the last 30 years since the Karate Kid. And I wonder how they talk about that in Japan, because I remember living in Japan, and the Karate Kid was called Best Kid at the time, right?
Mhm.
Best Dokido. And I mean, I guess that doesn't really matter. They kind of say that anyways.
They love it, yeah.
But yeah, really good. Like I love that idea of like being able to see what happened to them, and they chose
Mhm.
like interesting paths for how these characters changed over those years too.
Yeah, I love it when students can talk about what a character's future or past was like, because then we can also talk about that in terms of how it affected the response or decision that someone took. And then we can start talking about real life
Yeah.
and how we react, and putting yourself in someone else's shoes, and what would you have done, and what did you think, etc. So again, character analysis.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the opposite of real life, I'm going to talk a little bit about Murderville, which is a show I recently found on Netflix. It's got Will Arnett, and then basically every episode, it's totally a silly premise, but it's a impromptu comedy show where they bring on a guest to every show, and then the guest doesn't know what's going on. They just know that they're kind of meant to be in this murder mystery show, and then everybody else has kind of a script and an idea of what's going on, and then the guest has to go in and play along with the jokes and all the things, but they also have to figure out who the killer is at the end of the 30-minute show. And so they have a pretty set formula. They go to 3 different possible suspects, and they kind of talk to them and figure out what's going on with them, and then they use that information to guess who the killer is. But the guests are all like comedians
Actors.
or famous people, so it's like Conan O'Brien and Ken Jeong and Sharon Stone and like all of these people. So it's like it's a lot of fun. Like it's silliness, it's weird, and it's a very interesting idea for a show where it's like one person doesn't, like, they're in on the joke, but they just have to be an impromptu, comedian at the moment, and kind of get into the scene where everyone else kind of has an idea of what's going on. So,
Is Sharon Stone a comedian also? Or
no,
she's just like a
and
guest?
I was like, oh, Sharon Stone's in this episode. So I think part of it was just like, it's like, they don't have to be totally comedians. They're just like people who maybe were available that day. I don't know how they chose them, but
well, that's still cool because some of those faces are recognizable.
oh yeah, for sure. Some of these people are like quite famous, or all these different parts. So we'll talk about how we can use that a little bit later. But we got a couple more shows. Yeah, Murderville.
So speaking of not real life, the show Stranger Things.
Mhm.
I'm not a huge fan of the show. I did watch the first 2 seasons, but it's got enough. The kids, you can follow the kids' dialogue
Mhm.
easily. It's got enough of a hook to keep you watching.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Winona Ryder's in it, and those older Esol students who might remember who she was, or where, if she's famous in other countries.
Mhm.
The storyline is pretty good. And it's got a lot of vocabulary that you might not use because it is science fiction.
Yeah, for sure.
but also exposes them to that.
I don't know if people are going to need to know the Demogorgon and Demodogs all the time, but yeah, for sure, it captures your attention, and then also, if those students are adults, right? If they're like in their like, roughly our age, or if they're in like their 30s or 40s, or they have like kind of memories of the 80s, then some of that stuff, there's like a lot of nostalgia that's tied to that show as well. Okay, my last one is not exactly a show, but we'll talk about kind of why. So like Encanto right now is a popular movie, right? A big popular Disney movie, and a lot of these Pixar movies that are coming out can also be great choices. So if you have access to Disney Plus, you have tons of different resources for more modern TV shows on Disney Plus, and all of those Disney resources as well.
Yeah, and so again, talking about diversity and shows that reflect issues that we are facing now, and our students may be facing, but just kind of reflects how issues have changed, as a show This Is Us with Mandy Moore, and then I forgot the name of the guy from Heroes. Oh my gosh. But it's a family series. But they go through a lot of hardships, and they pull together as a family, but it's not your fairy tale family like other TV shows might have you watch, the older TV shows. This is a bicultural family. The kids in they're biracial, and there's a lot of issues in there that are difficult to tackle, but the show does a really good job. And there's a lot of moments where they're tearjerker moments. And I think that's where it's gotten people hooked, because there are all these not horrible things happening, but you discover the story of the dad and the mom, and how the kids, the brothers, and it's just, again, character development and understanding what led up to that moment and why they are the way they are.
Yeah, I know that you and Sarah Thomas talked about that last month when she was on the show, and I know that has been a popular one too. So I guess kind of the point that we're getting to with some of these, and we want to hear from you listeners as well, all of the DIESOL crew out there, like what are the shows that you also recommend? Because there is so much content these days, right? So much different stuff, but you do have to be a little bit careful, right? Like because some of that content is like, I love some some shows that I would never really recommend or bring into my class, and not even because it's totally inappropriate, although that might be a thing, but sometimes it's like too deep, or I'm thinking of like Letterkenny, which is a Canadian show, and it's like so fast and so much pulls on like deep language knowledge and deep like cultural references, too much so to the fact that and it moves at such a fast breakneck pace that I wouldn't want to use that in my class, but I might love it, right? And so so just kind of recognizing there are so many excellent shows out there, and what can you pull from your watching that you could bring into your class now, instead of just kind of relying on stuff from
Friends,
20 or 30 years ago. Any of the F shows, right? So anyways, yeah, so those are a few. When we jump back on the other side, we'll talk about some ways to use them.
All right. In 2022, we hope we get a bigger audience. Spread the word. Please share the show with a friend, especially if you're overseas. We get a lot of listeners from overseas, so sharing is caring.
Yeah, and so as always, share it out if you can. If you think the show is useful, if you think someone in your department might use it, and you say, hey, check this out. This is where some good ideas come from, hopefully, and we are here for you. All right, so Ishel, we talked about some of the shows that people might use, and now we'll talk about some activities or types of things that you might actually use the shows in your classes. So I'm going to start off with a classic one. I think I don't think this is a new idea by any means, but it is a lot of fun, which is bad dubbing. Have you ever done this? I think we did it before at a workshop, or we talked about this before, I think, right? So where it's So you'll play a section of a clip with no audio, right? And then you'll loop it, so you play it, several times, and then you get the students to make up dialogue that would happen inside of like what they think is happening between these different characters, or however many characters you have. And so they can kind of make up their own dialogue. They can then you play the loop, and then the students try and shout out the dialogue at the same time as what's happening on the screen. And then finally at the end, you can actually play the real thing for them to kind of see like how close or how different it was. And that can be just a lot of fun. And then you've seen some of those bad dubbing videos that are kind of jokes on the internet, and they're always a lot of fun.
Cool. So I like to do character profiles where like I have the students go into we watch something and then they go into a character, stepping in the shoes of that character, and then talking about having a conversation about it. So this particularly is I do with the Saturday Night Live skits. And again, with Saturday Night Live, there is so much, and it's free. It's on YouTube. Students don't have to be subscribed to any kind of streaming service, but it also requires screening. So if you're going to be bringing it into the classroom, yeah,
Watch it first.
screen them. But they're short, so it doesn't take up a lot of time. Create a playlist, curate a class playlist. That's like the easiest thing to do. And then, students can actually add their own. But anyway, for example, we did, there was a skit on Beauty and the Beast where, they're singing that Tell Us All This Time song. And then the Beast actually thinks that it's Belle who is going to undergo the transformation. So it brings up a whole conversation on beauty standards. And of course, we know that that's something very relevant to today's youth. But
Harry
now
monsters are definitely the most beautiful. So
So step into the shoes of the Beast. Why do you think he feels that way? And let's have a conversation about it. And as we're talking about it, throw in phrases that, are what is it? What isn't? What is? We use the word filter all the time, and now that's increasing plastic surgery. And we talk about self-image, and we talk about all of these vocabulary sets that are relevant. And then of course you can have students write about it. Doesn't have to be about the skit itself, but you could throw out a question like, should children be allowed to blah 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 blah, or should there be more restrictions around plastic surgery, or what are the effects of having media all around you? And now they can actually talk about it because they've seen something and they've got a point of reference. So you can definitely take it elsewhere.
Yeah, so that's a great prompt, and you can go in all sorts of different directions. But you're starting a little bit light, right, with the with the jokes and all the the Saturday Night Live comedy there. So I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to kind of combine two different versions of the same thing. So so we talked about Murderville as a show, and then at the very end they kind of they make the guess on who the killer is. Or if you watch a television show, it's a kind of like a very it's another murder mystery show called Death in Paradise. It's a kind of a weird one, but it's very formulaic but very easy to watch. And so they go through the show, you meet the different potential people, and then at the very end they kind of do the reveal on who did the crime. But you could do something like this with your students where you say like, hey, we're gonna watch this, and you could do all sorts of activities during the watching, but then at the end the student's responsibility is also to make a guess on who the killer is, right? What are the clues that you're getting? What did you see inside of the show? Like what types of things did they maybe say that would be hints for you to help you make predictions? And then I'm going to do also the flip side of that. So there's kind of two different sides of predictions. So one is like a murder mystery type of show, and you can go all the way through, guess at the end. But the other one is where, in any sitcom or any show, you kind of get to the climactic scene where like all the crazy stuff is happening. And a lot of times that builds up, right? From like, oh, this character is doing this, and this other character is at the laundromat, and this character is doing this, and then finally they all come together and something explosive and weird and crazy happens on the show, right? And so you could flip this and you could just show that final scene, the explosive scene where all the craziness is happening, and then you could have students predict how they got into that situation, right? So you could predict on the front end, or you could predict on the back end with your students as you're kind of looking through and making guesses about what might be happening inside of the show.
Yeah, I think, another point to make here is that many of these shows now have diversity within the cast. There may be a different take on stereotypes. They may reflect social issues of the time. Like, I would hate to show something that doesn't reflect what's been happening with Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, all sorts of things. So especially with comedy, it reflects what's going on, and you can have a conversation about it. You mentioned the Pixar films, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. But I like to show students that this reflects a slice of, I guess, again, it's the media's representation, but it's a little bit more inclusive of what it was 10 years ago or whenever Friends. Yeah, I never even watched Friends. I couldn't relate.
That's an interesting thing, right? Like,
yeah, I couldn't relate.
Yeah, I get it. Like, so yeah, for sure. Like, we can talk about that now. I think part of the thing that's interesting about like modern Pixar is they're trying to do better representation, right? They're trying to show. We were talking about in the pre-show, Esol, like the movie. Again, there's a movie, but Encanto. I've seen a lot of people tweeting about Encanto and being like, this girl looks like me, or, she like has realistic body standards, or, like she's kind of nerdy and not like this beautiful person that everybody is chasing after, but also a really, a relatable character, like, so all these different parts to it that I think are just really great. And they've been doing this for a while with Disney. I mean, we've seen it with Lilo and Stitch, and we've seen it with, many different shows over the last 10, 15, I don't even know how old Lilo and Stitch is, but they've been doing a better job of trying Moana, like trying to represent different cultural backgrounds, different ways of seeing the world. And so I think that there are a lot of conversations inside of there. And then also, like you said, with things like Black Lives Matter, so a show like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which I really enjoyed, but also like some people call it propaganda. Like it's like, oh, it's just kind of like making light of what the police do and making it seem like it's all for the good. But they actually kind of dealt with it in the last season. It was not totally smooth, but they were trying to like at least talk about some of these things, and so it's really interesting.
And I think it's important to mention that they're not always going to companies aren't always going to get this right, especially with Disney. I mean, I've heard lots of criticism with Coco and the way that certain things are portrayed. But if you're trying to bring a group into a little bit more representation, I don't think that it's a wrong thing. I mean, we're all doing this for the first time, where I think in 20 years we might see better representation of the people writing the shows that we are seeing, because then we'll be, a little bit better than where we are now. But I mean, 10 years ago, when I was a kid, I just, Beverly Hills 90210, I don't relate. The Hills, I don't relate. Orange County, the OC. I mean,
I do. I relate to the OC. Okay. Yes, but I do understand the problems that are connected to that.
Yeah, so it's a step forward, seeing someone represented and also being acknowledged. Like the fact that, again, talking about Coco, they talked about a piñata on CNN 10. So I thought, oh, here I go. I'm going to have to explain what a piñata is. My students knew what piñata was because they had seen Coco.
Oh, yeah.
So again, a little more knowledge or a little bit more exposure to something. And yes, you probably should know the word piñata if you're going to be in America, because we have a large population of Hispanics living there, Latinos, and a piñata is like part of our culture.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I am your standard white boy American, but like piñatas are part of how I grew up, like for sure.
Did you skateboard? Did you skateboard in high school?
I skateboarded into a piñata one time.
Did you listen to Green Day?
Oh yeah, of course. Green Day is the best.
Do you have an Apple Power tattoo behind your ear?
How do you know all these things?
Stereotypical white boy.
Yeah.
I kid. I
Pretty fly
kid.
for a white guy. All right. So next up
Are we gonna get in trouble?
what's that?
Are we gonna get in trouble?
For
We're
calling
gonna
me
get in
white?
trouble for calling you white.
I am a white guy. I think it's okay to say that, right?
I don't know.
We're not going to get in trouble.
Moving on.
This is our own show.
Getting in trouble with ourselves.
We're just going to continue to challenge ourselves. So,
Yeah.
a couple other ones that I had here. One is back channels. So we've talked about this idea of back channels. So if you have like a chat, if you're online, right, and you're used to kind of the Zoom chat going on, one thing that I really found was great was when I was showing videos, then I would encourage my students to ask questions using the chat so that they're not necessarily interrupting the class, but they're still kind of asking questions, or they're like, I don't understand what's going on here. What are they talking about? And then I've been able to kind of follow up with the chat, like as the show is going, and type in responses and say, oh, this is what they're trying to talk about, without trying to slow down the show every single time, but to kind of let them kind of have whatever, if it's a cultural reference or if it's a language point or what was this word. So I can kind of monitor it through the chat. And you can even do that in person if you have a back channel. So if you have, some sort of chat mechanism. So if you use Discord in your class, or in our case, we have Pronto installed inside of our Canvas LMS, and so people can chat with that. But you can encourage your students, say, hey, jump on the chat. If you want to ask questions, let's not interrupt the class while we're watching this, but you can totally ask questions and I will respond to them without stopping the show, pausing to talk about every single question that you have, right? And so I think that's a really cool use of how to use technology in combination with watching some shows. I think there's some interesting potentials there as well.
Yes. What I like to do as well is pre-teach target phrases, idioms, any grammar structures, anything interesting, because sometimes our advanced students are already going to know. Like, for example, I have students who've already taken the TOEFL, but now they need to refine their English a little more. So they're going to, or particularly right now, teachers that I have, they're English teachers in Japan, Japanese English teachers. So they've got to be well versed and they've got to practice the English. But using pre-selected lists that you come up with, or pre-selected vocabulary, grammar, idioms, etc., and using Youglish as a companion. Right now, that's been great, because if I give homework to, hey, watch this and highlight two phrases that you found interesting. Now let's plug them into Youglish, which I know we've covered. We always mention Youglish when it comes to one of those. Yeah. So Youglish. But then you get to hear clips of something that's not scripted, of real people saying it in context and in different contexts, or in only one context. And then that tells you, hey, I better not write this in my, email to my boss or my,
yeah, for sure,
my professor. So I like to pre-teach. And then sometimes again, you just start curating those lists, and then you start developing a bank of stuff that goes with it. I do this for CNN 10. And then I don't know if I think in the pre-show we were talking about how in CNN 10, because it's if you're watching this in class or students are watching it on their own, but then you bring in something like Saturday Night Live, where they're going to make fun of something that happened that week. Now the students have now gained the background knowledge in an academic context to now be able to understand on Saturday, what they might be poking fun at. Right. And I think that's another way to hook them.
I love that. Yeah, there's a lot of great things to tie in there. So my last one here, and again, the same type of thing. If you're pre-teaching some language, or if you're saying, hey, this is the grammar point, or this is the vocabulary that we want to look out for, one thing that you could do, if you have something like Padlet, or if you have a Jamboard or something like that, you could make different categories. So in Padlet, you can make different columns, or in Jamboards, you can make different boards. And then when students are watching the shows, they can go into the Padlet or the Jamboard or whatever, and you could kind of have like them do a little race when they hear or find the language points that you're talking about come up, right? And so you say, hey, type in the timestamp that you're seeing it at, and what are you seeing them talking about here. So I think there's a lot of kind of cool ways for them to chase down the language. I wouldn't want to overwhelm it, right? Like, hey, you don't need to do 20 different things while we're watching a 20-minute show. Like that would be way too much. But like if you say, hey, here are 3 or 4 things that I want you to pay attention to and look out for. And then they can kind of race each other to try and find examples of those things as you're going. And of course, if you have it scripted, there's a lot of scripts available online, or the transcription is available so you can download it and you can actually search for things specifically that you want them to pull out. And so I think there's a lot of interesting ways to do some language scavenger hunts that way, and a little bit more fun and less, maybe in some ways less distracting ways than we might have done it traditionally in the past. So I think those are a lot, Esol. I think there's plenty for people to get started with if they're trying to kind of update their TV shows. But if you have new shows or other shows that you think are worth sharing, please let us know. And you can go right.
We have a YouTube playlist. I'll throw my SNL YouTube playlist in there of stuff that I've already sort of screened. And of course, you teachers should be screening and not just trusting me.
And you can also leave comments on the show notes. So right at diesel.org/60, the number 60, then you can go right in there and say, hey, this is another show that people should consider sharing with their students. It's useful, it's valuable. We would love to. I mean, there's definitely many, many more than what we've talked about. And so I'd love to hear other ideas as well.
Okay, it is time for our fun finds, and I think we need to relabel mine to expensive fun finds because I've been having a lot of those recently. But this time around, I selected the Rifa Carrot massage rollers. Have you heard of them, Brent? They're like the bougie Japanese version of massage rollers, but they're expensive. They're very well made. They're highly coveted everywhere else. They're pretty much sold out in America, and they're more expensive in America. But
what do they do?
They have a solar panel window.
A solar powered massager.
Yeah, and then it creates an EMS current for slack muscles. And it's just awesome. And I just thought women are crazy, or people are crazy for buying these and paying that much money, until I tried one at the store.
And then you became a crazy hooked. Person.
And then I used the excuse of buying one for my mom so I could try one. So if my mom doesn't like it, I'll take it.
Oh, there you go. Nice. Okay. So Rifa Carrot, REFACARAT. REFACARAT massage roller. All right. That's an expensive pick. Mine is a hat. So I finally kind of broke in. I'm giving in to being like a middle-aged man at this point. So and here is the hat. I'll show it to you, Shell. But it's for taking walks in the sun, and I gave them to like.
It's an Indiana Jones hat.
Yeah, it's not too. It's like. It's kind of stylish, it's made out of hemp, and it's a Indiana Jones-ish style hat, but it's like the wide brim for like blocking the sun, and like this is totally like the hat you'll see people hiking around in.
Yeah,
it's like definitely like middle-aged dude
going on an adventure.
But
I've
been looking for one because I have a huge head. And it is hard for me to find hats that fit, and so I was at REI. And this one was on sale because they're discontinuing it, but they did have one that almost fits my head, which is 7 7/8. I should have properly an 8, but it's comfortable, and I don't have to worry about it flying off necessarily. So, so I got myself a nice, lovely adventure walking hat that I think will last for many, many years. And so,
our fun finds are reflecting our age.
Yeah, we're getting older.
Massage rollers and
hats to block the sun from burning my neck. All right. So welcome to your 40s.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to the show. We don't have any reviews for 2022, and you could win a one-of-a-kind Diesel pin by leaving one on Apple Podcasts. If you're giving us a shout out any other way, tag us on social media and we'll make sure to check.
Yeah. We're on Patreon and buy us a coffee if you want to go give us any thanks or appreciation that way. But again, we're really looking just share it with a colleague, share the show with a colleague, and that would be really nice for us. But of course, you can find the show notes, and if you have contributions, TV shows, or activities that you think are worth looking at, you can go leave that for us at diesel.org/60. And of course, you can listen to us at VoiceEd Canada as well. We are on the tweets and the tweetors at DieselPod. The show is at DieselPod. I am at Brent G. Warner.
And I am at Ixie_Pixie. That's IXY_PIXY.
In Haitian Creole, thank you is Messi. So, Messi for tuning in to the Diesel podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.